Good morning, everybody, and welcome to this session of GETDigital. My name is Lisa. I'm an Associate Professor of Organizational Psychology with DCU Business School, and I'm delighted to act as your MC for this event. Throughout this week at GETDigital, we've been sharing content related to business and leadership and entrepreneurship, and with a particular focus on how businesses can harness the power of digital technology to achieve their business goals. Turning into this session then, I'm really pleased to welcome Hannah Corkey, who is a Senior Digital Strategist with Edelman Ireland. And Hannah's talk is very interestingly titled, Get Real or Get Lost, Creating Great Content for Social Media. To the audience, I'd like to just encourage as many questions as you can so that we can all learn as much as possible about content on social media. The chat function is disabled for this session, but you can put your questions in through the Q&A function, which is just at the bottom of your screen. So I won't delay any further, and I'll pass over to Hannah for her talk. Thank you so much for joining us, Hannah.
Thanks, Lisa, and thank you for having me, and thanks to everyone for tuning in as well. I'll start off by sharing my screen, if you give me a moment. Lisa, does that look good on your end? Yeah, okay.
Yeah, perfect.
I will kick off. My name is Hannah, and I am a Senior Digital Strategist on the Edelman team. I've been working in digital marketing now for around the last 8 years. I actually started off in graphic design and editorial design, but then I joined a social media agency and I began to work with brands and helping them to build their storytelling online and how they were perceived by the audience and by their target audiences. And I realized that I loved the psychology behind marketing. So what makes us purchase something and what makes us relate to and connect with brand. So as I said, now I sit on the Edelman team, and we help our clients make as much of an impact online as they do offline, and create value for both them and for their audiences. And before we jump in, I just want to say as well, when we compare a medium like social media to maybe an older traditional medium like TV or even print, we're still at the very beginning of social media's lifespan, and there's so much more growth and development still to come. So let's look at how we can create content that makes a real impact on social media. So what we're going to cover in the next 40 minutes is, first, we'll look at the social media landscape. So what's the current playing field that we're building content for? We'll then look at understanding your audience and how it's vital that we put them first when it comes to why we create content. Next, we'll look at your role as a brand. And I will be talking mainly in terms of content from a brand perspective in this presentation, but nearly everything I say as well could be applied to your own personal brand if that's something that you're working on. And then during the final sections, we'll look at the importance of emotion in content, and then some practical ways we can apply what we cover throughout the presentation when it comes to planning. So we'll kick off first with understanding the social media landscape. So this is a snapshot of the current social media landscape in terms of monthly active users, and this is on a global scale. So how many people around the world log on to these channels each month? Still king of the social channels is Facebook, and it has been that way since 2009. Currently, more than a quarter of the world is active on Facebook. And you'll see then that the next three, WhatsApp, Messenger, and Instagram, take the 3rd to 5th spots, and they're all part of the Facebook family. So they're all owned by Facebook. So it's a monster of a social media family, and it's why there's so much pressure on Facebook to lead the way in terms of data protection and the fight against fake news. And what I'd love you to take away from this slide as well is that when we're creating content for social media, we have to take ourselves and our own habits out of the equation. So confirmation bias is the enemy of a good content strategy. My own social media habits don't mirror this chart exactly. And when I sit down with a brand, I have to remove myself from the equation and look at things like the data that we have on hand to help us inform our platform choices. So now we're going to look at an average day on social media and what that looks like. So first off, there we go. So how long on average do you think we all spend on social media? Is it around 24 minutes, an hour and a half, 2 hours? The global average is now 2.24 hours. And that's growing year on year. And I'll be the first to put my hand up and say that I feel my average is maybe slightly over those 2.5 hours. And during those 2 hours and 24 minutes, we scroll an average of 90 meters, which is equivalent to the height of the Statue of Liberty. Every minute of every day, there are 500,000 tweets shared and over 300 hours of video are uploaded to YouTube. And then throughout the course of every day, there are around 4 billion likes given out on Instagram. From when you wake up in the morning to when you go to sleep in the evening, you see an average of 5,000 marketing messages, and a lot of them you will see on social media. So I'd love you all now to just look around and see how many brand names, logos, messages you can see just without even having to move out of your chair. And the next time you wake up in the morning, start counting, and I'm sure you'll probably lose count after a while. But basically, with all that content, all those different messages, how can we create something that can break through all that noise? So to answer that, we're going to look at rule number 1, which is putting the audience first. So a great content strategy will look something like this. It's right in the middle of your objectives as a business or as a brand, and then what the customer wants, what the audience wants. So a brand like Nike, they want to sell you shoes, but you want to run fast and you want to feel powerful. So right in the middle there is Nike's ideal content strategy. And a lot of brands do tend to forget this and maybe lean a bit more heavily into their own objectives. And as a content creator or a social media strategist or a marketer, your job is to bring us back to that center point of what's important to the brand, but also what's important to the end user, to the customer. What do they want? So, of course, to put the audience first, we have to understand them. And there's a lot of different ways that we can do this. But here are 4 kind of core categories that you can use to help build out your audience profiles and personas and get a better understanding of their needs. So the first one is demographics. So things like their age, their occupation, their family dynamic. Next is geography. So where are they located? Or do they live in an urban area or a rural area? Next then is psychographic. So what cultural influence is there? What do they value? What are their hobbies or their personality? And then behavior is the last one. So things like how much time do they spend on social? How do they prefer to interact with a brand? And what's their average day like? And as we map our audience personas to this, it will help us also map out the content that we need to create so that it feels relevant to them. And we can then apply that audience understanding to our marketing funnel. And I'm sure that many of you are familiar with this framework, but just in case, as a refresher, this is our guide to what content and messaging we should be utilizing based on where the audience is in their journey to conversion. So a user at the very top at awareness stage of our marketing funnel, they're going to need a lot more context around your brand and what you do than someone maybe at conversion stage who understands that and just needs a little bit more incentive to get them across the line. And there's another layer that we can add on here to the traditional marketing funnel, and that's the benefit ladder. So the marketing funnel really focuses on our needs as a brand or as a business. It's business centric. The benefit ladder is much more consumer centric, and it places the consumer or the end user at the center point. And it helps guide us through their own viewpoint, through their lens. So it has three different phases. It has the living, where the user is driven primarily by emotional need. Then there's the looking, where the user they're now aware of the options that they have to consider. And then there's the buying phase. So at the buying phase, the user knows what they want, and they just need, again, that little bit more incentive. Maybe it's an offer, maybe it's a certain feature that sets your product or service apart from the rest, but they're nearly there to getting across the conversion line. And what this benefit ladder does is it reminds us that consumers are driven mainly by emotional needs and feelings, especially at the very beginning of their journey. And our content needs to tap into that and drive those emotional needs. And we'll look at that a bit further further down in the presentation. So how we speak on social media through our content is also a vital part of placing the audience first and making them feel catered for. I would hope none of us walk into a party and just start talking about ourselves. It's not going to make you a very popular party person if you go and do that. But instead, what we want to do is engage with the audience and listen to them and cater to their needs first. And what can really help us here is the 80-20 rule. So the 80-20 rule, when we apply that to our social media content, that states that 80% of our content should be value adding. It focuses on what's important to the audience and provides them with value or inspiration or entertainment. And then the remaining 20% is focused on promotional messaging. And again, that's there to drive direct sales or conversions, mainly focused on the lower levels of our marketing funnel. So now that we have, a good understanding of our audience needs and how important it is that we place them first when it comes to creating our content, it's time that we look at our own role as a brand and the part that we play in their lives. And this will help us navigate and differentiate our content from all those other 5,000 marketing messages that we see each and every day. So here are some mission statements from three major brands. Apple say they want to challenge the status quo and to think differently. Disney say they want to create happiness for people of all ages everywhere. And then finally, Coca-Cola say they want to refresh the world and inspire moments of optimism and happiness. And you'll see that none of these mission statements mention the product. Apple don't say we want to sell computers, and Disney don't say we want to sell movie tickets. This is all focused on their why as a brand. So in his book, Start With Why, Simon Sinek uses the golden circle model to explain that it's our why that has to be central when it comes to defining our role as a brand. So in a nutshell, people don't buy what you do, they buy why you do it. And once we establish why we do something as a brand, we can then answer other questions like how we create the product, what our USP is, what it's made from, what's our point of difference. But it has to start from the outside in and start with your why. So a really great example of this why is with Hertz and Avis. So Hertz are one of the world's largest car rental company. They have the most cars to rent, they have the most locations, they've the biggest team. And second to them was Avis. And Avis knew that no matter what they did, they were not number one. They couldn't claim that spot. They can't say that. So their slogan became, "We try harder." As the second best car rental company, we're going to go that extra mile to keep your business and to keep you happy. And that became their why. And Hertz can't take that away from them because it's unique to Avis. And so by leading with their why, Avis were able to strengthen their how and their what, even though Hertz was the top competitor. And we can then apply that why, how, and what framework to our marketing funnel. So when you're creating content for each stage of the funnel, based at where your audience is, at awareness level, your why is going to be so important to engage the user and then retain them. It's going to drive better results than if you immediately go out there with a "this is what we make" message. At consideration level, we can then begin to talk a little bit more about how we do what we do, still retaining our why, but now that the user has context, we can go into a bit more detail because the user already understands and appreciates our why. And then at conversion level, we can speak more directly about what type of product we have or service we have, because the user is more ready to convert. And then there's loads of different ways that we can define our role as a brand. And at Edelman, we use a couple of different models. One of the ones that I've used in the past and that I really enjoy is the 12 archetype model. So these are 12 different archetypes that we find not just with brands, but also with characters in movies or in books or even people that we know in real life. So we all know the hero in the story or the wise sage character, and even politicians will sometimes use these archetypes to position themselves in a certain way in people's minds. And the whole idea behind using this archetype model is to anchor our role for the audience and make it clear to them what our purpose is in their lives. And this will also help us anchor our own behaviors, our own messages, and our own content as a brand. So for example, we could look at a brand like Google, who are a typical sage type brand. So they're looking to provide wisdom and understanding, and they're rooted in providing us with the truth. And then a brand like Harley Davidson is a classic outlaw type brand. They're risk takers, they value liberation and bravery. And then we have Skittles, who their content is always super fun and colorful. They're a typical jester brand, and they make us laugh and they delight us. And that leads me into our next section, which is going to be on how emotion drives our behavior. So one of the greatest skills I think you can have as a content creator is empathy. So understanding why someone feels a certain way and then being able to create or relate to that is a skill that you should definitely nurture and value, because at the end of the day, emotions are the key to influencing behavior. So again, think back to those 5,000 marketing messages that we see every single day. We live now in an attention economy. What are you going to give me in exchange for my attention? And great content can do that by providing value and leaving a lasting impression, rather than just looking to generate, an impression or a video view or appear on somebody's social feed. And then interestingly, in that battle for our attention, facts are generally not as effective as emotions. So they say that our intelligence and our perception drops slightly when emotions become involved. And I'm sure we've all made those emotional purchases or decisions. And then later on, when we're thinking a bit more logically, we'll think back and go, why did I do that? Why did I buy that? So the majority of advertisers in this survey reported that their emotional campaigns drove double the ROI compared to campaigns that were focused only on rational messaging. Now, a combination of the two is also effective and still higher than those rational only campaigns. And that's often the route that we'll have to take as marketers or content creators, is that combination of emotional, rational messaging, depending on where the user is in the funnel. And regardless of the product or service, behind every logical thought or decision that we make is an emotional driver. So even something like quite practical, like a job search, is fueled by emotions like fulfillment and the want for happiness. Something like a new pair of shoes is very often more than just a practical decision that we make. It's something that makes us feel good. And then it's not just positive emotions that really make an impact. Emotions like awe or sadness or shock can also be just as memorable and as effective. So I'm going to show you now an example of an emotionally driven campaign from a brand. And I really want you to take note of the emotions that are at play here.
A hug. A hug is love. A hug is loss. A hug is help. A hug is warmth. It's peace. Trust. I will always love you. A hug is air. How I do. A hug is glue. Just a sweet word. A hug is a fire. A hug is the light. Still, I'll always be there for you. How I do. But you'll have this place to call on. A hug is just holding on. But in the end, a hug is hope. Because the best hugs are the ones we haven't had yet. We will hug again. Zalando.
So that was from an online clothes retailer called Zalando, and it was launched last November to promote their upcoming holiday line. And you'll note that there was no mention of product. This was not about clothes. This was about a human connection and a feeling that we can all relate to. And the timing of it as well was so important. This was after a year and during a sea of COVID-related content that all sounded and looked really similar. And Zalando just paired everything right back to pure emotion, pure connection. And they made this, which was incredibly effective. They understood that their role as a brand could be to connect everyone through a shared experience. And that's what was so effective about this piece of content. So now that we have a greater understanding of our audience and our purpose, let's look at some practical ways that we can turn these great ideas into content. So it can be really overwhelming when you sit down for the first time to map out your content plan and it's a white piece of paper or a blank screen and you don't know where to start. So we often use content pillars to help ground us and get a greater sense of what content is available to us and what we need to create from scratch. So this is an example of maybe 4 content pillars from a brand like IKEA. So they might have one content pillar that focuses on that lovely emotional message that they have, which is the wonderful everyday. And that looks at connecting to the audience through shared moments or events that we can all relate to, like home life and family moments. They might also have a content pillar that focuses on their people. So whether that's customers, their staff, their team, their designers, their suppliers, that content pillar can focus on those topics there. They can also have another content pillar that would be like better solutions. So solutions for a small apartment or a really, really big family. And then finally, they might also have a content pillar that is focused on their corporate social responsibility as a brand. So what are their sustainability initiatives? What are they doing to be socially responsible? And by building these pillars, we can categorize what's important for us to create content around, and then also what matters to the audience and what we need to create for them. And then once we have our content pillars in place and we know kind of the scope of content that we can create, we can begin to map that out over time. So this is the Hero, Hub, and Hygiene model that was designed by Google, and it can help us design and plan our content in the most effective way for both the audience and for our own resources. So hygiene content is at the bottom there, and it's that regular content that your audience is always going to be searching for, and it fulfills their core needs. So this type of content shouldn't need massive planning or resources or budget. It just needs to be consistent and of value to the end user. And then hub content is a little less regular, but might require a little bit more resourcing. And it might be something like a video that you've put some time into, or a report or a case study. And there might be a campaign around it for a few weeks. You might focus on a certain subject or product or topic for a longer period of time. And then finally, we have the hero content at the top. And those are those big impact, large scale campaigns like what we just saw from Zalando. And they often take a lot more time and a lot more budget, but then they leave a lasting impact on your audience. And those campaigns might span a few weeks or a few months, and you might do 2 to 4 a year. And then social media is always on, and that can often create an awful lot of pressure for you as a content creator. But even though it's always happening, it doesn't mean that you always have to be in content creation mode. And this is where evergreen and reactive content can come in. So evergreen content is content that we can prepare in advance and can be shared at any time. So it's not tied to a particular season or trending topic or an event. It still supports our content pillars and our why and our brand message, but it can kind of go at any time of year. And then reactive content is that content that we want to create around a trending topic or maybe breaking news. And by creating that evergreen content, we're leaving ourselves more room and resource to be able to react to things like that in a much more planned and thoughtful way. And it will help lighten your workload without diminishing the value that you're providing your audience. And then understanding content formats and what works best for both you and your audience and the social platform that you're sharing the content on is something that you have to take notice of and shouldn't be overlooked. So a text-based tweet, let's say, might work just fine, but on any other platform, you know, an image or a video is going to be a lot more effective and drive much better results. And then it's important to also keep in mind how the audience is consuming your content. So are they viewing it on a mobile phone or on a desktop? Are they going to have their sound turned on or turned off? Are they willing to invest time into watching a 1-minute video or a 1-hour video? So asking ourselves those questions early on in our content planning phase is so important. And I'd encourage you to plan those things sooner than you would think. The last place you want to be is a week out from your new campaign launching and thinking, should we have created a video? You don't want to be there. And a brand that does this really well and understands this is Adobe. So Adobe make computer software like Photoshop and Illustrator. And on a platform like YouTube, they have these long form how-to videos about certain techniques with their programs, and they might last for half an hour to an hour, because Adobe understands that when their audience is on YouTube, they're willing to put in a bit more time because they're investing in their skill set. So their videos are that bit longer and they're a bit more informative. But then on a platform like Instagram, to say on IGTV, Adobe have those same tutorials, but they're shortened down to a minute and they're focused much more on the amazing visuals or the end result. And more so, this looks cool. If you want more, you can go to our other platform. But they understand that on a platform like IGTV, the user is only interested in watching something for around 30 seconds to a minute. And then on their Instagram feed, Adobe aren't sharing that much video content at all. They're focused much more on static content that looks beautiful. Because again, as the user scrolls through their Instagram feed, they're not looking too much for things like information. They're looking for just something that's emotionally impacting or looks beautiful. And you might end up having a piece of content that looks a certain way on one channel and does a certain thing, has a purpose on one channel. But then on another channel, it acts a certain way. And we can take, when we're doing our planning phases, we can take all those formats into consideration and map those out before we launch. And then when we get to a point where our content is ready and we're about to hit post, here are kind of 5 questions that we can ask ourselves, just so we're sure that this is the right next step, especially when we're reacting to something like a trending topic. So the first question is, does this piece of content support my objective? Are we looking to generate video views or comments or website traffic? And is it the best format for those objectives and for the audience? So does my audience care about this topic, or is it just something I want to talk about as a brand? Is it of value to them? The next question is, do I have the right credibility as a brand to be discussing this topic? Or is it actually kind of irrelevant for me to talk about as a brand? Can I own this topic or be a part of this conversation? And then which of my content pillars does this fit under? Am I maybe creating too much content around this pillar and not enough around another? And then so important is this final question, and it's, what action do I want my audience to take after they've consumed my content? And this is often something that we need to tell the audience quite clearly through a very clear and simple call to action. So it might be something like, click here to learn more, or comment below with your thoughts. But we have to make it very clear to the audience, this is what we want you to do next, or else they're just going to go elsewhere. So lastly, we're going to just take a brief look at the future of social media and what we can expect over the next decade or so. So the first thing is growth. So the platforms are growing bigger and bigger. There's more people on them, more and more content, and especially spurred on by the pandemic, we're now socializing a lot more on social media, and we're shopping a lot more, and we're sharing a lot more. So social media is here to stay, and it's only going to get bigger and bigger over the next few years and be more ingrained in our daily lives. And then in line with that, we have increasing rules and regulations on social media when it comes to our personal data. And brands are going to have to move away from a lot of the third-party advertising that happens and third-party targeting, and instead shift towards content that helps the user choose the brand. So that means brands need to create real value and earn their communities, which is a great thing, because that's going to create deeper trust and relationships between them and their consumer. And then online commerce and shoppable content is here in a big way. Social platforms are adding more and more of these shoppable formats. And this example here is already happening on Instagram. The entire shopping experience can happen without you having to leave the app. So you can look at the product in your timeline, you can shop, you can check out, you can do all that without having to even leave the app. And then lastly is augmented reality. So this is allowing brands and influencers as well to engage with audiences and create really immersive experiences that gamify connections or help the user purchase a product, like with this IKEA example here. So then just to wrap up on what we've covered today. So I hope now we all have a strong understanding of the current social media landscape and the current playing field that we're building this content for. We know the importance of putting the audience first, and by understanding our own role in their lives when it comes to our content. We know the impact and the importance of creating emotion. And then we also know what's ahead for the next decade on social media. So thank you so much for tuning in, and I think we can open it up to Q&A.
Thank you so much for that, Hannah. It was really fantastic to hear your insights on that. And I was personally very interested in your advice for how we can go about creating better content on social media. There's quite a few questions coming in here, so I'll jump straight in to the first one. So there's somebody here asking if you can provide advice on where they might find a template for understanding their role or the content pillars. So if you're trying to figure out what your content pillars should be, what are sort of practical steps that businesses could follow to get there?
Well, I think definitely one that is helpful is having a mixture of inward focused pillars and outward focused pillars. So again, say you have those 4 pillars, 2 of them are focused on a very pure audience need. So again, if we look at the IKEA example, that might be the functional benefit or those wonderful everyday moments. And then the other 2 might be more inwardly focused on your brand and what it is that you need to say. So more in that how, what area. So that might be specific to products or your corporate responsibility, or again, your own team, your story, things like that. So I think that's a nice additional layer of framework you can add to those.
Absolutely, thank you. And then the other part of that question was around your understanding your role, which I think is the archetypes. Is that the section that they were? So how do you decide whether you're an everyman or a hero or a?
Well, the important thing there is to remember that you don't have to be the same role for everybody, for all your audience. You might have a different purpose depending on what your product is, but you might have, your purpose might change depending on the time of year or your audience demographic. So really it's looking at something like the archetypes to help define certain campaigns, certain pieces of messaging, as a guide, as a bit of a North Star, but also not as, you know, something concrete that can't be changed. I really think the best content strategy is a flexible one that can move and learn with the reaction that you're getting from your audience. So start off with a role that you kind of know for certain you play in your audience's lives. Test that out and see if there's other avenues as well that you might play in.
And what's the measure, Hannah, of whether it's a success? Like if you test out one of those roles, is it how much people interact with your post, or is it how many times they click on the link when you said, please click below? Or
so that's where it's really important when you're doing your planning to have your objectives up front. And if you do want to, say you want to create an emotion and leave like a lasting impact like the Zalando campaign, you're probably going to look at metrics like engagement on the platform, likes, positive sentiment through comments, things like that. You can look at things like video retention. So how many people started the video and then finished the video. If you're running a campaign to drive traffic to, say, an e-commerce website, those metrics aren't going to be that important to you. And instead, you should focus on things like traffic. So how much does it cost me to get the user from the social media channel to my website. Once they get to my website, what are they doing? Are they leaving straight away? Are they looking around a little bit? So how you measure the impact and the success of your content is all tied back into your initial objective and why you created the content in the first place.
Brilliant, thank you, Hannah. I have a question here about Facebook. So Caroline, wondering about how you can try and get some organic reach without boosting your post or trying to pay for it. And have you got any kind of practical tips on how businesses can achieve that?
Yeah, like the first thing I'll say is that platforms are making it more and more difficult for us to grow organically. And there's this growing talk around, do we have to pay to play on these platforms? I don't think we're fully there yet, but it has become more difficult over the years. I think, again, making sure that you're creating value is the number one. And once you feel that you're doing that, look at things like joining more groups, being part of the community. It does take an awful lot of time and resource to grow a channel organically. It's kind of often weighing up, do I want to pay to get there, or do I want to put my time in? Which of those resources do I have more to put into this? So it doesn't happen overnight, but with time and with the right content and with focusing on being a part of the community rather than just placing content on the platform, that will help you grow organically.
Perfect. I had a kind of a related question when you had a slide at one stage about different types of content, and they were divided into hygiene, hub, and hero. I think.
Yeah.
And it sort of struck me as you were talking that the higher levels seemed to be easier things to do if you had a lot of resources, if you had a big budget to put behind this, and if you had a lot of time and other resources as well. Have you got any tips for, I guess, SMEs, or if people are trying to use these kinds of advice to build a personal brand? Is there a way to get that kind of content without spending lots of money or having lots of resources to devote to it?
Yeah, I still think there is, and it's why I love the Hertz Avis example so much, because they couldn't compete with those big impactful messages. They didn't have that. They went with a very pure brand message, and it worked so well because it was their truth and their why. It was unique to them. I would say look at tools and platforms that can help you better plan out and resource and see, do I need to spend my budget on all these kind of stock imagery and video, or can I go out and create something? We now look at social media with content that isn't perfect all the time. We're on TikTok, we're on Instagram stories. Your content doesn't have to be this perfect polished campaign. It just needs to have that true core message, that real message. So I would say, again, go back to your why, and that's where you'll find how to create those hero campaigns without having to, hire a host of celebrities and creating this big budget blockbuster ad.
Yeah, that's really good advice. Thank you, Hannah. There's a question here actually about just what you find large companies are doing on social media that you think might be bad practice, and are there things that organizations should be trying to avoid?
I think again, going back to the very beginning of the presentation where we looked at where your content strategy sits, and it's in between your business objective and your audience need. And I do think one of the biggest challenges, and as a marketer, it's again our role to pull the brands back into the middle, is brands focusing too much on their own need, or again assuming that because it's their product, it's their baby, which is often the way, everyone's going to love it, everyone's going to need it and flock to it. But we still have to go back to what the audience needs, where they are in that benefit ladder, where they are in the funnel. Are they ready for this purely product focused message, or do we actually again need to go back into where they are emotionally? There's another lovely piece of framework that we use at Edelman quite a lot, which is the think, feel, do model. So what is the audience currently thinking, feeling, and doing? And what do we want them to think, feel, and do? And how do we get them from one to the other? So that can be another really great way we can go back to that middle ground between what the brand wants and what the user wants.
You had a nice ratio, I think, at one point as well, like the 80-20, sort of 80% of your content should be related to what they want and only 20% related to actual direct selling. And sometimes I think ratios like that are useful as a way of kind of benchmarking what you are doing and which way it needs to move.
Yeah, exactly. And that all ties back into the emotional statistics that we saw, where either an emotional or a combination of emotional and rational works a lot better than just purely rational messaging.
Perfect. There's somebody asking here if you've got any tips for content creation on TikTok. So I assume particularly for businesses, how they can use TikTok maybe for content creation. My only experience of TikTok really is what my 7-year-old daughter uses it for, which is learning how to do new dances. So what can organizations do on TikTok that can create value for them?
Well, organizations, I don't think have to go out and start doing all those dances for sure. We can cross that one off. What I've seen that's been really effective is when a brand can genuinely join in on the fun. Like at the end of the day, TikTok is a fun platform. It's not LinkedIn. We're not there to tell a corporate story or a brand's kind of business related product story. We're there to have fun. So I've seen, Innocent Drinks are doing a great job. Ryanair are doing a great job at having a bit of fun with the platform and joining in. And I've also seen brands have great conversations in the comment section. So unlike maybe Instagram and Facebook, where the key piece is the piece of content, on TikTok, we often kind of glance at the content, go to the comment section. What are people saying? What's the general kind of vibe? And that's where I see a lot of brands joining in, especially if the user is posting something about their product or something that relates to their brand. And I think that's another area where even if you're not creating a load of content for TikTok, you can still be part of the community as a brand in the comment section.
That's good advice. Not so much dancing.
Yeah.
From Grace, then a question about fake news. So with the rise of fake news and the use of bots to spread negative content, how will this impact ad spending on social or brands driving UGC?
Yeah.
That's something that the acronym?
UGC, unique. So maybe not. Maybe I don't know.
It's not an acronym that but I guess are fake news and bots impacting the content that people are posting, and is there something that brands can do to try and protect themselves against that?
Yes. So in terms of how the platforms are reacting, especially through paid mediums like Facebook Ads Manager and things like that, there are an awful lot. The process is now a lot stricter, that your content will go through longer review processes. You really need to look through a lot of the rules that they've set out and what you can and can't say. And if your content doesn't pass, it'll just be reverted back to you. It won't go live. So really becoming familiar with that process and the guidelines the platform has set out is really important. And then in terms of you as a brand, it's very, very tricky to navigate that. And a lot of it does lie with the platforms needing to come in and create better systems and processes so that we're not having to deal with bots and fake news and fake accounts. One area that I think us as just an individual can really help is being better critical thinkers. So, when we read something or when we watch something, to go and look at a lot of different sources for information and insight, especially outside of our own demographic, age group, country, try and get as many different perspectives as possible. But I would say that the ownership is certainly on the platforms to really come in and help us navigate that as brands.
Yeah, and I think that's a really nice point though about personal responsibility as well. And I know as part of GETDigital this week we have a couple of talks that are related to the idea of kind of fake news and how you can be a more responsible consumer, I suppose, of social media content as well.
Yeah.
I have 3 or 4 questions related to metrics, so I might come back to that kind of idea. I know I sort of asked a question earlier about how you decide whether it's been successful, what you've created, but it seems to be something that's coming up again and again for our audience, thinking about how they measure the engagement with their content and maybe how they pitch kind of return on investment to organizations. So if your organization has spent X amount of money on supporting your social media activities, how do you come back and say this was a good return on investment, or here's what we got for that money?
I think look at any metrics that focus on action. So you have passive metrics like an impression or reach, which all they really mean is your content appeared in front of someone. Or if you're paying to target someone, it appeared in front of the right person. And those are all great metrics, but they're passive. The user hasn't done anything yet. We don't even know for sure if they saw your content. They could have just scrolled past. So looking at those action-based metrics like engagement, comment, likes, the video retention is a great one. Any of your traffic metrics, your clicks, your landing page clicks, your website traffic, those are all great ways to be able to say to your client or to your boss, look, we're making an impact here. The audience is listening. You know, our website traffic is increasing, and it's good website traffic. They're staying there. They're consuming more content. I think those are all great ways to prove that social media is a good resource to invest in. And also to remember that social media, for the most part, often lies at the beginning of our funnel. So it can, or the beginning of the user journey. So it can often be the first touch point, the first time a user sees your brand, either through your own social media channels or through an influencer or through someone sharing your product. So again, it's important that we have a space there so that we can own our own brand messaging and you know, show the user what we want them to see when they come searching for our product.
There's an interesting question here, Hannah, about targeting, I guess, your content to specific audiences. So somebody asking that a lot of the examples seem to be focused on younger generations, and their business is specifically focused on the 50+ demographic. And so do different age demographics mean you should take a different kind of an approach, and how do you differentiate that in your campaigns?
Yeah, so I think it's so important. I know in the presentation I showed you, we had stats and figures and percentages, but always go back to your specific audience first and look for data that relates to them specifically. So like I said at the beginning, you know, that's the global social media landscape. It doesn't necessarily reflect my activity or maybe even the majority of Ireland's activity. So when we're looking at, you know, users who are 50+, look for information either that you own yourself, so it's on your website or on your social channels, or look for reports and case studies that are focused specifically on the audience you want to speak to. Like off the top of my head, I know that on Facebook, a lot of age groups, you know, 40 and above are growing quite quickly on Facebook. If you have a B2B type message, LinkedIn again has, you know, less of a younger kind of audience and has a lot older. Twitter is what might be a good one, but anything I say could be totally irrelevant to you and what your data is telling you. So I would encourage you to look there first to help you make your platform and your content decisions.
Okay, that's really good advice. A question here as well about reusing content. So if you have a campaign that you have got more attraction or should have got more attention and it didn't, is it okay to go back and try and reuse that content at another date? And have you got tips, I guess, for should people be trying to repackage it in some way? Or
definitely, like I think often, you know, even when working with brands, sometimes a campaign ends, it was brilliant, it was great, and sometimes you don't revisit it, and it's such a shame because it definitely made an impact. The audience, really enjoyed it. It worked for your objectives. So I would definitely encourage you to go back. And what you can always do is maybe test out the same campaign, content, or message in a different format. Maybe try it on a different channel. You can also, if you're doing paid advertising, look to retarget users who have already engaged with that content and maybe show them something similar, maybe continue the story of the content or a related message. And also, when you're repurposing, look back at your best performing content. So say you had 10 different pieces, you might get a better result if you go out with 6 of them and repurpose 6 of them again, rather than put all of them back out there again. Yeah, that would be my advice there.
Very practical, thank you. I think we just probably have time for one more question, so I'm going to take this one. So if emotional campaigns do better than fact-based campaigns, then how can we make sure we don't create a situation where it's just a battle of who can make their customers more emotional?
Yeah, and I think that goes back to understanding your role. So you can't be everything for a user, and you really have to stay true to yourself. So, Zalando focusing on that connection element was lovely. If they went out there with a campaign that then focused on creating something really cheeky, humorous, something like what Paddy Power might put out there, I don't know if we as the audience would trust them. We kind of go like, what are you doing? You're jumping around, you're trying to be all different kinds of things. So I think, again, rather than getting stuck into a battle of emotions and trying to claim everything, go for, again, what's true and relevant to your brand and what it is you're doing. Go back to your why, and build from there, and try and not be too influenced by, be aware, but not too influenced by what other brands are doing.
Yeah, I think that's a really, so we're aiming to create emotion, but some sort of consistency, I guess, in the kinds of emotions that you're trying to create, and not.
Yeah, true emotion, not emotion for the sake of emotion that's true to you.
In line with your values. That's so helpful. Thank you, Hannah, for all of your insights. It's been really interesting to listen to you, and I think there's been some really practical advice here that a lot of our audience members will hopefully be able to apply as soon as they disconnect from GETDigital. So thank you for that, and thank you everybody for all of the questions that you have submitted. There's a huge number of questions coming in, and also people telling us that UGC is user-generated content, apparently. So that's I will add to my vocabulary.
I've never made an acronym out of it, but
no.
Now I will.
Okay, so I'd like to thank you, Hannah, for the time and for all of the advice that you've given us. And GETDigital will continue at 11:45 with our next session, which is going to be an Ask Me Anything session about content marketing. So I hope lots of the audience here can join us again for that. And thank you again, Hannah, for your time. It was lovely to meet you.
Thanks for having me. Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.